We found out a little of Leone's history and how she came to be our bodyguard. Orphaned as a child, she was raised by our father and trained by him to become a Queen's Knight. Now, these videos are going to be spoiler-free until, well, I spoil things. But it doesn't take a fortune teller to figure out Leone is being set up as our love interest of the protagonist here. But I would really advise you to pay a bit more attention to Leone and her relationship with the prince as we move forward. I find her to be a much more compelling character than many other characters in a similar role. We skip ahead a day or two to the Queen telling us of our mission to inspect Stormfist in preparation for the Sacred Games. She informs us that George, Leone, and Sialeeds will be joining us just as they did during the inspection of Lord Lake. On the way out, we're stopped by Lim, who wants to go with us, but her and the rest of the royal family will be arriving in a week, the day before the games begin. Farad tells us to experience as much as we can and says his farewell. With that, we head to the pier. Before we set off, we talk to Kyle, who expresses concern at sending the Prince and Sialeeds to Stormfist, mainly due to his distrust of Lord Godwyn. He and Sialeeds briefly talk about Sialeeds' engagement to Godwyn's son before we set off to Stormfist.
This is such a nice wind, isn't it?
Yes. If it keeps up like this, we should reach Stormfist by tomorrow afternoon.
Nice we can go almost anywhere by ship, even though this is an inland nation.
Yeah, thank goodness for the coast river. But the convenience of the river has its disadvantages, too. I mean, we've been doing nothing but traveling lately. If we didn't have the freight, I bet we wouldn't have to take trips all over the place.
Huh, don't know about that. The Queen doesn't exactly strike me as the merciful type.
No, you're wrong about the Queen. Her Majesty is really very kind. Right, Prince?
That's right. It may be a bit strange for me to say, but Arstadt was a very gentle and good queen.
Yeah, I can tell. Everybody in town loves her. And Farad obviously loved her enough to marry her. But if you ask me, though, she seems kind of unstable at the moment.
I'm not surprised. From your point of view, you've only known Arstadt since she acquired the Sunmoon.
So, she was different before?
Yes. After getting the Sun Moon, Her Majesty changed.
And I think it's getting gradually worse. I'm really worried. What's wrong, George?
Lady Sialeeds, watch out!
Both of you, get away from the side of the ship!
Something's coming!
What the hell is that?
No! I hate lizards!
The posse has been waylaid! The fight with the lizard is a bit harder than the Ulses from before, but you still have George, and George is still overpowered as hell. It is our first enemy that can inflict a status effect on us, however, that being anger. Anger makes it so the character afflicted with it cannot be used to perform co-op attacks or formation skills. Both mechanics I'll go over later. Since you really can't do much other than basic attack at this point anyway, it's not really a problem unless you're making a video series where you wanted to explain co-op attacks in this battle and the one character you can use them with gets hit by it. Fuck you, Lizard. Lizard's name is Zadam, and that's about all that's interesting about him other than the neat leaves on his head. Just auto attack and eventually George will take care of him.
That was really disgusting.
What's going on?
Don't come over yet! Stay out of sight! And tell the crew not to leave their posts!
Yes, ma'am!
Leone, what do you mean?
Damn.
I can't take this anymore!
Look!
It's the Godwin family ship. Is that... Gazelle?
We're saved from a bunch of lizards by the convenient arrival of Gazelle Godwin. This is Lord Godwin's son and Sileid's ex-fiancée. The party hesitantly thanks him for the timely rescue. In private, however, as they arrive at the dock, Sileid brings up how Gazelle suspiciously showed up in such a coincidental manner. The party suggests he could have staged the attack, but quickly they logic themselves into forgetting about it.
I haven't been here in a while. I forgot how amazing this place was.
George, this is your first time here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Over there is the arena where the sacred games are going to be held. And this is the Godwin family castle.
Looks like a tough nut to crack. It'd be hard to attack.
Is that all you ever think about?
We arrive at Stormfist and finally meet the man himself, Marscal Godwin. He welcomes us to his abode while Gazelle and Sileid exchange overly polite words with one another. Gazelle tells us there's to be a banquet later tonight, but for now he'll show us to our rooms. He takes us to the arena, where the sacred games will be held. He explains that normally the arena is used for gladiatorial fights, and mentions that the Queen looks down on such things, which is why we've never been there to see them. Gazelle decides to take us on a tour of the arena, and Leon mentions in secret to George that though Gazelle and Sileid are acting friendly, something about them belies strife between the two. Okay, so it turns out Gazelle is like the worst tour guide ever, as he's nowhere to be seen. What we have to do is wander around until we go to where Gazelle is supposed to be leading us. I guess it's better than a string of long cutscenes, but it's kinda odd to have to learn to navigate a new place while we're told we're being given a tour. But whatever, our first stop is just a few steps into the arena.
Dragon horses.
Yes, it's the Vetus Dragon Cavalry.
So that's them. Never seen them before in person. Are they gonna compete in the sacred games?
No, not them.
They don't side with any member of the nobility. They've sworn their allegiance to the Vetus River and Falena alone. They don't involve themselves in politics.
There's going to be a Dragon Cavalry exhibition taking place at the Sacred Games opening ceremony. They must be practicing.
Wow, that's incredible.
They're spectacular, aren't they?
Indeed. Super fast cavalry soldiers that can run freely on both land and water. I can see why they're used for patrol in both rivers and solid ground.
Your Royal Highness, what do you say? Would you be interested in meeting them?
We go outside to meet the Dragon Riders to find they've already moved on. Sileid seems relieved, leading Gazelle to mention her phobia of lizards. Not knowing where the heck to go on our supposed tour, we somehow find ourselves outside the arena. Here we find two chests, the first containing some old book we don't know what to do with yet, and our first tactic, the double arm tactic. Tactics play a big factor in how you set up your party in Suikoden V. By going to the formation option on the main menu, we can see all the tactics we've acquired so far. Tactics give you specific bonuses to the stats of your characters and also provide you with a formation skill, powerful abilities in combat that use your entire party's actions. It's not just about selecting tactics that give you the best buffs and skills, however. Each tactic has set positions that must be filled by your party. These letters by our characters indicate their range. S stands for short, M stands for medium, and L stands for long. The further away their position is to their range, the less accurate their attacks. For example, if I put Siles, a long-range character, in the front row, she ain't hitting shit. The double arm tactic boosts all our characters' defensive stats, but requires 2 people on the front line. Since George is our only short-range character, we keep the standard formation for now. Before we leave this area, we first find another cat. Just disgusting. Come on, man. It's the year 449. You can't be saying stuff like that anymore. Feeling faint at such bigotry, we go to the infirmary, but there we spot a set of ominous stairs. Gazelle tells us that down there lies the gladiators, and that we shouldn't go down there. Being curious little beavers, we insist. Turns out, gladiators are kept in basically a dungeon, as slaves. The party is appalled at this situation, but Gazelle insists that these are traditions that the nobles hold very dear. He goes on to explain that Queen Arstadt made it illegal to torture or mistreat gladiators, but was unable to ban the practice outright despite her efforts. If you haven't gotten the idea by now, the Godwins are pretty into the not-so-nice aspects of nobility. Heading up to the stands of the arena, we see that old Urim Barrows has arrived at Stormfist as well, and is watching a practice match between 2 competitors. Urim has taken to calling us his brother, since he's sure to win the Sacred Games. So these are our choices in terms of politics in Falena, folks. Evil or stupid. Well, that's actually pretty realistic. He shows us his champion is a guy, a gladiator his father bought for him. George and Leon note he indeed looks very capable. It just so happens he is sparring with Gazelle's champion, a mercenary named Childrick. Urim is ecstatic at Zagai's triumph, while Gazelle is very sarcastic about the whole affair and urges us to continue his tour. We take our leave of Urim and, get lost. But eventually, we remember where to go and finally find our rooms. Gazelle's awful tour complete, we're interrupted by commotion between a large man and the guards. He pleads with the guards to let him compete despite being a foreigner, as Farid was a foreigner when he won the last games. He's still turned away as he is from Armes, Gazelle insisting that the kingdom of Armes is a threat to Falena. It's hard not to feel bad for him being a victim of prejudice, but then he calls Lim Little Limmy, and maybe it's for the best. We have a bit of a discussion with Gazelle about foreign policy before he suggests we see the rest of the city. Sileeds bids us to go without her as she has matters to discuss with Gazelle.
It sure is lively. It must be because it's almost time for the Sacred Games.
I don't mind the commotion. Not a huge fan of all this security.
Yes, Stormfist is pretty famous for its guards.
As soon as we step foot in the city of Stormfist, we see a show featuring a girl and her leopard. I like how Leon tries to figure out what kind of tiger the leopard is, since there aren't leopards in Falena, a nice bit of world building. The girl is trying to show us how her leopard, called Ernst, is able to count and do math. Turns out, he can do math better than the girl. This cat doesn't say anything racist, so we continue on. Just below that duo, we run across the man the guards threw out earlier. He tells us his name is Gavaya after he proposes to Leon. He also makes this face when he does it, so we get away as soon as possible. Talking with the citizens of Stormfist, we learn that the city is separated into 2 parts. The old part of town where we are now, where the upper class and nobles reside, and the new part of town where the less fortunate live. We also see that the people here really like the Godwins, particularly the nobles. Exploring Old Town for a bit, we find a chest that contains just some boring old medicine. Eventually we head south to check out the new part of town. The air here is smoggy, and though it's never said, I believe that's because much of Stormfist industry lies here. Most of the city's vendors are here, and though there are plenty of civilians walking around, most of the buildings look like factories. Down one of the many perpendicular alleys that make up Newtown, we find a chest containing a bracelet. Again, a piece of equipment that we're probably just going to sell. We also find a dog. Okay, listen here. You are an actual, literal bitch. I don't think you have any room to talk here. Its owner has a crush on Gazelle, which seems to be the case with many of Stormfist's ladies. Just across from them is a town blacksmith, where we'll upgrade Leon's weapon to the highest we can at the moment. We leave George alone, cause he don't need it. Exploring further, we find a chest that contains a leather hat. This is a headpiece that's actually better than what we started with, so we put it on. There isn't much else to do in Newtown, so we head back to Old Town, where we, of course, find an old man. He tells us that Stormfist used to be Felena's capital. This helps explain why everyone here is so hoity-toity. A little bit away from him, we find a chest that contains some... and another one containing a bandage. The bandage is actually a piece of equipment that, you guessed it, isn't better than what we currently have equipped, so we continue down an alley.
Hey, Prince. I'm turning left at the next corner. Follow me.
You may be quick, but it takes more than that to be a good spy.
What?
Who are you? How did you know this was the prince?
Look, I'm sorry, this isn't what it looks like.
Prince.
Hey, come on. He doesn't look like a spy or an assassin. He's got to have a good explanation for this.
Thank you, sir. My name is Shun.
What's that? Is that a white tattoo?
Yes, sir. As you can see, I'm a gladiator.
Huh?
I'm sorry I was following you. But there's something I really have to tell you, Prince.
Doesn't sound like something we should talk about on the street. Let's look for someplace more private.
The party heads to the inn with their new friend, but first we take a peek at what Gazelle and Sialeeds were discussing. It mostly pertains to their past, Sialeeds lamenting that Gazelle has changed for the worse since their engagement was broken by Arshtat. There's mention of a civil war that took place before the previous queen took the throne, during which Gazelle lost his mother. Sialeeds says the reason their engagement was broken off was to avoid such conflicts from happening again.
How can I help you? Huh? They're dressed like queens, knights. And don't tell me, the prince? I don't believe it. Oh no, I don't believe it. Oh my, what do I do? What do I do? Oh.
After that introduction, we talk to Shun about why he was following us. He tells us that he and the other gladiators have been hearing strange, muffled voices coming from somewhere in their cell. They can't make out what is being said, but they do know that they have heard an Arme's accent. He tells us he escaped and sought us out, as he wouldn't trust the nobles that own the gladiators to not punish them for whatever they found out. He knows our mother put an end to the torture they used to face, so he figures we'll be more sympathetic. He makes mention of another gladiator whose eyes were plucked out because he was too strong and who then was shipped out on a boat. Now, this is a reference to a character from Suikoden 1, so I suppose I should talk a bit about just why the hell I'm doing these videos on the 5th entry in the series. The primary reason is, well, I've played more of 5 than any of the others. It's a game that got me into the series and remains my favorite. Furthermore, Suikoden 5 actually started development as a spin-off to the series before the 5 got on the title, when it was actually made a prequel. Yes, chronologically, this is the first game in the series. I won't be mentioning much more about the other Suikoden games unless it's vitally important to what I'm talking about, because who knows, I might go back and do this for them too someday. Anyway, the party agrees to look into the voices without letting the other nobles know. First, however, George mentions we should probably let Sialeeds know what we're doing. At the bazaar, we conveniently run into Siledes as she is exiting the arena to come find us. We tell her of our plan and she's all for it, having already told Gazelle that we won't be coming to the banquet. We go back to the inn to pick up Shun and wait till nightfall. Shun brings us to a well in the new part of town he says will lead us to the arena basement. And here we have our introductory dungeon. This is an old secret passage beneath Stormfist, one that Siledes thinks predates the Godwins. Immediately, we're introduced to the dungeon's gimmick. Follow the rats and use the buttons on the ground to open doors. This one leads to a chest that contains some antitoxin. There are random encounters here, since apparently this underground passage is infested with birds? Okay, whatever. I suppose I'll tell you about co-op attacks now. Certain characters that have connections with each other will be able to use their actions to perform one attack or ability. For instance, for now we only have access to 2 co-op attacks, one with the Prince and Leon and one with the Prince and Siledes. Our co-op attack with Siledes has us nunchuck the shit out of people, and then Siledes hits them all with her chakra, hitting every enemy on the screen. Our attack with Leon that we've already seen has us again nunchuck the shit out of someone, and then Leon comes in and katanas the shit out of them. This one is single target but does a good amount of damage. Just a short bit into the passage, and we find a crazy man living underground. Well, according to him, he's Egbert Aethelbald, the last remaining Aethelbald of the Stormfist Aethelbalds. Siledes tells us that the Aethelbalds did indeed used to be the lords of Stormfist until the Godwins took over, about 100 years ago. Egbert is civil with us, but he really doesn't like the Godwins. We take our leave and continue. The enemies here really aren't much of a danger. This is one of the last times the game will really hold our hand like this, and George can still handle it all basically on his own. We do need to look out a bit, however, as the enemies here can inflict toxin on our characters, causing damage every turn. And yes, this does persist after combat if you do not heal it. The layout is very simple here. Hit a button, go to the door the button opened up. We find 2 more chests, one containing another Jizo and the other a set of leather armor that we give to Shun. Eventually, we hit what looks like a dead end, but Shun shows us it's actually the secret passage he escaped from. We enter into the dungeon cell we saw earlier. The other gladiators thank us for coming and show us to where the voices are being heard from. Turns out there's another secret door on this side of the dungeon, and George busts it open after hearing something about the Queen.
Zagai?
Hey, withdraw!
Right?
Prince!
Zagai doesn't seem to be going anywhere, so we run after the strange men he was talking to. We travel a bit through a short passage very similar to the previous dungeon before we climb a ladder to the surface. We come up into a forest and find the suspicious men immediately. They turn to us and attack. This fight could get a little hairy if you got unlucky in the dungeon and didn't heal up, but for the most part these jabronis aren't gonna touch George. This is because not only does George hit like a truck, he's also got great defense and chances to both parry and counterattack. Shun dies here, but it's okay, he gets better. We return to Stormfist, where Gazelle has the guy chained up. He explains that they found daggers belonging to Armes on the men we beat up, confirming their allegiance. Gazelle assumes they were here to assassinate the Queen during the Sacred Games. Urim is also here, none too pleased with Zagai and the silent treatment he's giving his interrogators. Gazelle, to the shock of Shun and Urim most of all, explains that one of the other prisoners confessed that Zagai is from Armes. Urim then becomes fearful that suspicions would be placed on him and the Barrows family, but Gazelle quickly says that he's under no such scrutiny. Zagai is most certainly going to be executed, but Gazelle says that such matters can wait until after the games. Later, the party discusses what just transpired and expresses a lot of unease about it. It does seem like an awful lot of coincidences happen around Gazelle. Speaking of, we shift to a scene between him and his father.
Oh, you're here, Father. What a rare treat.
I wanted to hear your thoughts.
My thoughts, you say?
That's right. Are you happy with all of this?
I'm fairly satisfied, I suppose.
I do think you're scheming a little too much.
All I did, Father, was simply to float a little information about Stormfist's underground passage and Zagai. I can't help it if Armus took the bait, or if they got Barrows mixed up in it and brought destruction upon themselves. And I can't help it if the prince got himself involved and turned it into a delightful show.
That's exactly what I mean about scheming too much. When you get involved in intrigue, do it decisively. But I'm warning you, it's best to not get too involved.
Yes, I know. All you have to do is wait, Father. Indeed. I'll be ready to reveal our grand cause at the Sacred Games.
Then, the Sacred Games begin.
Let our mercy as deep as the Fatus and our authority as powerful as the sun be revealed to the entire world. To choose one worthy of becoming Princess Limslia's husband, I hereby proclaim the start of the Sacred Game.
Let there be brave and fair competition in front of our queen. Our prince will now participate in the ceremonial match.